Welcome to Chelmsford Baptist Church stuff. We're starting a season on John's Gospel. It's going to run for some time and we're going to break it down into chunks, looking at different aspects of John's Gospel. So I don't know how this is going to work out on the YouTube stuff, but we'll just put it out there as we get a chunk, a season together. We'll put it there. So if you're just joining us, you're very welcome. And if you've never read John's Gospel, I suggest you read it. It's good stuff. Anyway, we're going to start at the very beginning. And this is literally at the literal very beginning. Well, actually, it's before the very beginning. This is going to start before it even starts. So this is how it starts. Well, this is how it doesn't start. This is how it is before it starts. Does that make sense? I don't know if it makes sense anymore. Well, nothing makes sense, does it really? If you think about it too much, words don't make sense. If you think about the word, if you look at a word too long or use it too much, it doesn't make any sense, does it? Anyway, that's quite a good link because we've been talking about the word. Because we're going to go and start before everything ever started. And that was a rambling, possibly slightly heretical, I don't know. I hope not. Well, I hope it was. I don't know. Well, let's start, shall we? John, chapter 1.
John chapter 1. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children born not of natural descent, nor of human decision, or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him. He cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me, because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses. Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God, and is in closest relationship with the Father, has made him known."
Now, if you're following this sequentially, that's a good word, isn't it? Sequentially. If you're following this sequentially with Chelmsford Baptist Church, we've just done a big chunk of Old Testament stuff. And you probably know I am a massive fan of the Old Testament. I love it. I have to wrestle with it. And it usually wins, to be honest, but I love it. I can't get enough of it sometimes. But when you step into the New Testament, there's a distinct shift in everything, because the New Testament, or most of it, is much, much smaller than the Old Testament. There's more detail. There's more to unpack. It's a smaller package, but there's more to unpack from it. And that doesn't mean that is not disrespecting the Old Testament in the slightest. It's just a different way of doing things. I mean, Revelation goes widescreen again. You read through the New Testament and then you reach Revelation. It starts gently, doesn't it, with here's a letter. Here's a vision of Christ in heaven standing with some... And then BAM! The whole book just kicks off. But before that, it's a much more human scale. That's one of the contrasts we noticed in some of the Old Testament stories is you have the big story of the political and the international goings on. And then the lives of small, ordinary people like us, or the prophets, or some of God's individuals or families. And it kind of swings between the two. When you get to the New Testament, it kind of stays. I think the New Testament is very much a kitchen table, which is kind of how I understand my faith. My faith is a kitchen table faith, not a temple and an altar and all that stuff. It has its place in glory. But in terms of a human being trying to live their faith, I'm all for the kitchen table. So John's Gospel. I'm going to start with a bit of an overview, because what I'd like you to do, well, I'll tell you in a moment what I'd like you to do. First of all, let's take a look. Now, John's Gospel stands out from the other Gospels. The other Gospels have a long word, which I'll give you. And that long word is synoptic. They're called the synoptic Gospels. And that's because the word synoptic is Greek, and it means seen together. Now, some of you may know this, in which case go and suck some eggs or something, if I'm telling you stuff you already know. But when you get to John, it's a very different feel, because the other three Gospels, Matthew, Mark and Luke, they kind of rely on each other and they're interwoven, sometimes literally using the same words as the other Gospels use. There's a much closer relationship. Once you get to John's Gospel, everything changes. The flavour changes, the lighting changes, the camera angle changes, everything shifts. Now, the three synoptic Gospels have their own feel as well. That's true. I'm not disputing that. In fact, I would say that is the way it is. But John's Gospel is a different animal. Firstly, John changes the order of things. The writer of John's Gospel, we'll call him John, changes things. Now, the other Gospels, between the three of them, have a fairly consistent order of events. This happened, that happened, that happened. Everything happens in pretty much the same order. When you get to John's Gospel, things move around. For instance, the cleansing of the temple in John's Gospel starts the Gospel. That's where it begins. Jesus starts his ministry by cleansing the temple. Whereas in the other Gospels, the synoptics, Matthew, Mark and Luke, that happens at the end in what we call Holy Week or Passion Week, when Jesus kind of just before his execution, he clears the temple out. And you think, well, it's one or the other. It can't be both. Well, theoretically, it could have been both, but they would have mentioned it. Why has John put it there, but everyone else puts it there? We will come to this later, but not today. Now, in the other Gospels, in the Synoptic Gospels, you also get clusters of teaching. Sermon on the Mount is a prime example of that. Bundles Jesus teaching together. In John's Gospel, he kind of sprinkles these sermons through his Gospel, which we will look at in one of our seasons. We'll be looking at some of his different approaches to these sermons that he does. So Jesus kind of gives sermons more than small bits of teaching, which is what the Synoptic Gospels give us. One of the prime examples of that, which is I think is our first season, is the I am sayings they've become known as, or Jesus I am. No spoilers, I won't tell you what they are. Anyway, miracles is another one. John scatters them through his Gospel, as the others do to an extent, but he makes a kind of deal out of them. He picks 7 specific miracles, calls them signs. So he's using the miracles as a specific teaching tool. So John, then, he takes the kind of material of Jesus' life and he builds it into a structured, coherent narrative. There's more of a flow, if you like. It's more literary, I guess, telling the life of Jesus, whereas the other Gospels tend to be a slightly more random, a bit more chaotic, probably a bit more how life actually is. And John does this because he's not overly worried about when Jesus did things or what order Jesus did things in. What John is bothered about, what he's trying to get across, is who Jesus is. That for John is what the gospel is about. That for John is the key thing. That is important to the others. But John is kind of, I guess he sermonizes the life of Jesus. Probably one of the ways you could describe that. So he reorders the life of Jesus in order to get across this teaching about who Jesus is. It's also thought that John was writing to emphasize the deity and the humanity of Jesus. By the time John's gospel was coming together, there was these people, do you want the long word? There's these people coming along who were particularly denying the humanity of Jesus, saying that physical world was an evil thing created by the devil and it isn't good. So how could God have anything to do with it? Therefore Jesus cannot be God, or Jesus could not have been human. And John's like, no, that's not right, you proto-orthodox heresiologists. That's the word. So they were known, I don't know if they were known at the time, because there's discussion over this as well, as Gnostics. The Gnostics. They had a very a view of the world that was dualistic. It's all big words now, isn't it? Sorry about this. I don't know what they mean either. I'm just talking and hoping no one asks me any difficult questions. But the dualistic world is the kind of like the yin and the yang model, that there's light and there's dark, and they are to be in balance. And for the Gnostics, the idea is that the physical world is bad and God and the spiritual world is good, and God is all spiritual. And there's this tension between the two. That is not a biblical view, because the biblical view, if you go right back to the beginning, the actual beginning, not the bit before the beginning, God makes the physical world, the universe, and he goes, hey, that's good, isn't it? So the Gnostics were kind of in denial of that. And God said, well, I'll become a human being, because that's a good thing to be. Whereas the Gnostics go, oh, wow, that's terrible. No one wants to be a human being. Everybody wants to be a cat. They never said that. That was the Aristocats. Anyway, so the Gnostics, whether they were a movement or a collection of ideas, or which they probably were, and then it kind of formed together, and then in history everyone lumps everyone together like everyone agrees with each other. I mean, look at the church today. If everyone does a history of the church in 200 years' time, they go, well, the church said this. No, it didn't. There's loads of different views within the church on loads of different issues. We have loads of different approaches to doing things. Even within the Baptist church, one Baptist church to the next is not the same. We are similar, but we are not the same. And it's the same with that kind of the thinking back then. Anyway, I did the reading on the Gnostics there, so you don't have to. But feel free to look it up on the Wikipedia. I think the people that are big on the conspiracy theories and all that stuff, they like the Gnostic stuff. But anyway, that was a later heresy. Yeah. Anyway, so that's some background. So John is trying to emphasize the humanity and the divinity of Jesus. So the Gospel of John is much more of a teaching gospel. The others, to varying degrees, kind of tell it like it is. This is what happened. Isn't Jesus fab? Whereas John's, well, here we are, and here's some facts about Jesus, and here's some theology that we've been considering. So it's the latest. It was the last gospel written out of the four. So we're going to begin our season on John's Gospel. So this is quite nice, isn't it? It's quite a short introductory talk to it. I'll probably ramble on later on when we pick up on some of the other themes. So what I would suggest you do is absorb those words again. We've heard them once. Either replay that bit or read them for yourself. You can use the Message, which is my my preferred devotional Bible to read, because it's got such a flow to it. But try other Good News, NIV, try the King James even if you want, and see if you can get the cadence, is that the word? And the flow. See how the different translators have emphasized the story. But absorb that, because the opening words are magnificent in John's Gospel. They announce the arrival of Jesus, and there's no nativity in John's Gospel. Nothing as banal as kings and shepherds. Yeah, we don't need them, because we're going to go right back to the brooding Spirit of God, the word that spoke creation into being. And the word which was later to speak to us and to the wind and the waves. Why did all of creation obey Jesus when he spoke? I picked this up from the Jesus storytelling book. It told the story of Jesus calming the storm, and it said Jesus stood up and spoke to the waves, "Hush," and they did. And in the Bible, the storytelling Bible, it says, because they recognized his voice. And I thought that was beautifully put. I don't know. Anyway, it's great. So this first voice, this word of God, we're reminded again that the word of God isn't a book. Important as the Bible is, we don't worship the Bible. We worship the word, the living word. And the living word is Jesus. Not a book, not a preacher, not YouTube. It's Jesus. So these magnificent opening words remind us that nothing ever has and nothing ever will extinguish the light. Darkness, see, it's not really real. It's just a temporary thing, and it has no power of its own. Because God is with us and dwells among us. Read John chapter 1 again.